avoid legal snags by telling them they're being recorded, right? Hello and welcome back to Footy A to Z. It's been a while, but here we are. And then things are a little bit different this time. So we're doing our first ever kind of audio, what would we call it?
I don't know, separated podcast.
Yeah, separated video call podcast. We normally can catch up, but of course we live in Melbourne, so that's not something we're allowed to do at the moment.
Hopefully by grand final day, we'll be able to maybe do something together again. But yeah, for the time being, we're working remotely like everyone else.
Yeah, this is also maybe a little bit of a test run because we're kind of thinking we might have to do another one of these calls later on. Won't say too much about that, but just to pique your interest a little bit, we do have more planned with us on the screen.
Yeah.
So anyways, the point of today's podcast is to talk about our latest video, which is the All-Australian picked by the stats. And we just thought we'd kind of take it to a deeper level, run you through why we wanted to make the team, the thought process behind making the team, and kind of like just how we came to what you saw in the video.
Yeah, I think one of the things we said in the video is that the problem I think that we've had and that a lot of other fans have had with the All-Australian selection process is lack of transparency. So I think we just wanted to give you guys as much insight as possible into how we went about picking our team and the methodology behind that and how it all worked.
Yep. You just froze for a second there, but I could still hear you, so I'm going to hope that the audio was recorded.
We can have a little technical difficulties counter going up in the top corner.
Yeah, we'll put up a summary of what you said in case we missed it. But anyways, back on track. Yeah, so it kind of started with we were texting each other while the team was being put out, and we were kind of, like many people, were surprised by the formation of the side. I'm not sure exactly where you stand, but I'm of the opinion that if you were going to just pick the best 22 players for the year, then you would just release them as a list. If you're going to go to the effort of putting them in a team, then I think you need to give a bit of respect to who plays where.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if you go all the way back, the All-Australian team comes from the old state carnivals back when there was no national league, and the best players from each state league would get together and they'd play a carnival, and out of that they'd pick who they thought the best team for that tournament was, and they'd put the players mostly in position. I think that tradition has kind of continued on into the AFL era that we have today. And for the most part, they picked, defenders, they've picked midfielders, they've picked forwards, but I think the forwards probably got a little bit stiffed more than anybody else.
Yeah, definitely. Pretty clear to see that may have been the case. So then we were like, well, if we were going to do a All-Australian team, because it's just a bit of a thing you do if you're a YouTuber, you make an All-Australian team. So if we were going to have a crack, then how would we go about it?
Yeah, so I think we weren't actually planning on doing it. It was only when the team started coming out and we were like, this is a bit weird, this is a bit odd. And then we were kind of like, well, what's the point of complaining about it if we're not going to have a go at doing it ourselves? I think at one point you literally messaged me and you were like, if Dustin Martin gets picked in the forward pocket, I'm going to post a rant on Instagram. And then 5 minutes later, he got picked on the forward pocket, which was pretty funny. So my idea, I don't know, it was a bit of a left field idea, where I was like, maybe we pick, 22 statistical categories, roughly assign those to positions, decide which stat is most important in each position. So if it was, ruckman, you pick hitouts to advantage, full forward, you'd pick goals. Whichever player topped that statistical category would then get picked in the team.
Yeah.
Which was an idea I think it's safe to say you were not entirely enamored by.
Well, it's also an idea I didn't entirely understand because at that stage we were still just texting each other. And just to clarify, Andreas means 22 stats, one stat per position on the ground. The winner gets selected, and that's how you get your team. And I thought that he was like, let's just do one. Let's collect as much stats as we possibly can, and then use our own footballing knowledge and kind of make educated selections from the stats.
Yeah.
And just have that be the basis. You were like, no, it has to be the stats. That's the whole point of this whole thing. And we kind of came to a little bit of a compromise in the end.
Yeah. So we were like, rather than one stat, we'll expand it out to 4 stats. And that gives us a bit more scope, I think, to debate, statistically what makes a good midfielder or what makes a good back pocket. Rather than just having, one stat, which I think would be a bit more of a gimmick kind of thing than a more insightful, in-depth analysis, which I think I'm happy that we went down the other path.
It was more work.
It was a lot more work.
But it was worth it. We basically spent...
something more meaningful.
We basically called from like 3 p.m. Friday afternoon for the rest of the day, collecting stats, and then 11 to dinner the next day.
Yeah.
And by that stage, we were ready to record the script that we'd come up to.
I think it's important to say we were also pretty keen to lock in our stats before we looked at any of the results, which I think is important to say when you look at some of the players that got picked for the team, where it was like we wanted to pick the stats, and then whatever the stats turned up, we decided we would be bound by. We weren't going to change anything after the fact. Yeah,
it was, and that was kind of like a way that we had ourselves accountable. We had the stats, and that was that. They decided.
Yeah.
So like the kind of the variable, the bias that we put on the whole experiment was just that we chose the 4 categories for each position.
Yeah. We didn't want to, be picking Dustin Martin because of the vibe.
And that's the second Dustin Martin dig. We love Dustin Martin. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that we're Richmond supporters. We try not to be biased, but they pop up in the videos for examples, perhaps more often than we'd like.
I've also
So, Dusty, if you're watching this, love you.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So that was our goal. That's what we wanted to do. Were you happy with what we got out of it, with how the process worked?
Was I happy that was the 22 best players for each position for the year? No. But was I happy with the experiment? I would say pretty happy.
Yeah.
Because it was almost nice that it threw in a couple of oddballs.
Yeah, I think we learned a few things, which was interesting.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to make fun of Liam Jones a lot less than I used to after this experiment.
To top 3 categories, it's quite impressive.
Yeah, and afterwards, just like out of curiosity, we looked through a couple of other stats to see like, had we gone down a different path, could we not have ended up with Liam Jones as our centre half back? And he was actually like top 3 in a lot of defensive stats.
Yeah, so we checked some others beyond that, probably another 2, 3, 4 maximum other areas, and Lever as well. No matter what, if Lever was not above kind of Harris Andrews and Darcy Moore, then Jones was, and vice versa. There was always one of them was above. So we had to keep true to the mission that we started out on, and they earned their selections in the stats team.
Yeah.
That being said, we did find the defenders by far the hardest to come up for what stats to choose. The forwards was very clear cut. It's stuff like goals for key forwards. Super easy. I think we had goals, contested marks inside 50, score involvements. And it's like, I don't know if there's really too many big things you're missing there. And it gave us the obvious results of Hawkins and Dixon, which was nice to see that they were very clearly the two in the system as well.
Yeah, by a long way as well. And the third was Tabiner, who we both agreed is pretty justified to be put into third spot as well.
I'm just gonna do a few little snipping hands.
We were trying to figure out how we could get Tab the Crab in the team, but it was not to be.
Yeah.
But we did start with the key forwards. That was, the first stats we collected, almost as like a proof of concept in a way. Like we were like, okay, key forwards are probably the easiest, so we'll start with that and we'll see if we can make a system that worked. And the system that we made picked Hawkins and Dixon, and we were like, all right, we're flying.
Yeah, it was like, well, we're going to have, 20 or 18 out of the 22 here was kind of the initial thoughts. Yeah, and then another important point was probably McRae on the wing. There's been a bit of criticism. The stat was from Champion Data, 4% time on the wing for the year.
Yeah.
But the Stats Pro we were using on AFL.com didn't let us search by wingers, only by midfielders. So we found the Fox Footy one that let us search by wingers, and McRae was still in there. And at that point, I think we were that was one of the last ones we did on Friday night, and we were just running with it at that point.
Yeah, we were pretty tired. We'd been looking at numbers for a long time. And I think it's fair to say we couldn't really be bothered trying to redo the stats, I think we couldn't be bothered going through the list, deciding who the players that Fox Footy had of the players Fox Footy had classified as wingers, who actually were wingers, and then recalculating the stats from that. So we kind of just took their word for it and left McRae in. To be fair, he did do well in 3 of the 4 static. He was second in 3 of the 4 categories that we picked. So in a way, it's like if we say these are the important stats for wings and McRae's done really well at 3 of them, then maybe even if he doesn't normally play on the wing, he would actually be a really good wingman if they put him there.
Yeah, it was like he would fulfill the role that we had set out.
Yeah. Although it's probably worth noting that Todd Goldstein, for some reason, was also included as a wingman in some of those stats.
Who was conclusively not. And I think Josh Battle was a midfielder or something.
Yeah. So
I'd be keen to see his Champion Data minutes.
If you're watching Fox Footy, get your statistical categories together, please. Yeah, but other than that, I think there weren't that many other players that were picked out of position. Luke Ryan was an interesting one that we had to kind of have a bit of a debate about, because initially he wouldn't have been in our team. And the reason for that was because the AFL Stats Pro had classified him as a key defender. By the metrics that we were using to decide key defenders, he hadn't had a very good year. But when we switched over and looked at him through the lens of what we were using to select rebounding defenders, he had a very good year. But he wasn't being included in those stats because at that point we were looking at non-key defenders as our category.
Yeah, we only kind of realized that by mistake as well, because we were like, how close is our team? So we were saying, how close is our backline to the All-Australian backline? And we were like, oh, Luke Ryan's been nowhere to be seen. What's going on with that? So then we compared his rebound 50s numbers was the first thing. If he was classified, how would he rank among the general defenders? And I think he beat Jake Lloyd, who was clear first, by like another 10-15.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, there might be something here. So he earned a selection. And he may play as a key defender due to necessity at Fremantle, but I think if they had two key backs, he'd play that kind of flexible role.
And the other thing we said was that he's only, 186 centimeters, which is would be very undersized if you lined him up against all the other key backmen in the league.
Mm. Or if you lined him up on Tom Hawkins or Charlie Dixon, who we had chosen at full forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and he did come very close to beating Jake Lloyd as a rebounding defender. So I think, we both decided we were pretty happy to classify him that way, and say that the Stats Pro had maybe got that one a little bit wrong as well.
Mm. I think that was really all of the kind of head scratches that we came across. Everything else was more or less clear cut. It was just about adding up all the numbers and making sure that we counted everyone who needed counting. Will Snelling was a funny one, actually.
Yeah. We're looking at our pressure forwards. We were pretty adamant that we wanted to have a pressure forward category in there. I think ever since Richmond won the premiership in 2017, it's been, players like Dan Butler, Tip and Woody, even like Castagna and Arts at Richmond this year, Daniel Rioli. The number one thing that they're judged by is their forward pressure. So we definitely wanted that to be reflected in our team because we think it is such a crucial position. But we also decided that we wanted to keep goals in there as well because at the end of the day, if you're in the forward line, you want to be kicking goals. So, the forward who could do both was then the best pressure forward. That was very clearly Dan Butler. I don't think anyone else really came close. But Will Snelling gave him a run for his money. I think was in the top 10 for 3 categories and was then ranked 160th for goals.
I did check that. I think you found his goals with all players, maybe.
Right.
So he was actually about in the 50s for small forwards.
Yeah. With 5 for the year.
Yeah. Which bumped him up to finish, I think maybe 3rd behind Tip and Woody, just off the top of my head. If you do want to see all of the stats, the Google Doc that we used to collect them will be in the link.
In the description.
Bear with it. If you just kind of take a little bit to take in how it's been recorded, it will make sense if you just kind of just absorb it a little bit at first.
Yeah. And also bear in mind that we were staring at numbers for about 5 hours. So if there's, an arithmetic mistake, please be nice to us.
And Andreas is the mathematician.
Because, I think the most common comment we got on our Superflood video, which just ticked over 100,000 views quite nicely. I think of those 100,000 views, about 1% of people commented telling me that I added up one of the scores wrong.
Yeah, it was a stiff typo because we said the correct margin, but it was just the score was just you hit the wrong key, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I don't want to make it about this. I think we should move on from that topic, but we can bring that up again another day.
Rant aside.
Yeah.
Would we have liked more stats? How happy were we overall with the ones we used?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were literally just talking before we started recording this about the Stats Pro on the AFL website. I think it's an improvement in like the statistics interface that they've had in the past, but it is by no means perfect. I think we'd recorded like 2 or 3 positions already before we realized that if players were tied, that tie was being broken by alphabetical order. Like if 2 players kick the same goals, then whoever was first in the alphabet would be ranked, 7th, and then the next would be ranked 8th. And we were like, well, that's not really fair. So we went back and changed things.
And there were times where, some stats where there's really low numbers recorded by players, where that gap for being equal, there can be, 5-10 people equal. So that's actually making quite a big difference when we're just counting up, 4 numbers between 1 and 50.
Yeah.
5 or 10 can be the difference between making the team or not.
Yeah. Exactly. So that was a little bit annoying. I think the area where we both agreed we wanted more stats was in defense.
Mm.
I think the main stat we used was the defensive one-on-one contest loss percentage. And there were a few problems with that stat. Like it's based off losses, not wins.
Yeah.
There was no way to there was no way to filter it by, how many contests they'd been involved in.
Yeah, and like spoils, we didn't know whether it was a one-on-one,
Yeah.
or whether they were leaving their man and making, the play of the game, like the Jerry McGovern 2018 mark. It's like it's very hard to measure those kinds of plays through the stats that were available.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd be interested whether Champion Data measures stuff like come forward defense, players leaving their man or whatever.
It would be nice to have access, I think, to a better level of defensive insight. And the other thing which we mentioned in the video was that players who teams that have a real big focus on a team defensive structure, sort of like a zone system, would mean that their defenders aren't going to be isolated one-on-one in contests as often.
Yeah.
I think we were both surprised how low Dylan Grimes was in a lot of the stats, in a lot of the categories. But I think we also then decided that was probably because the stats weren't really reflecting the fact that he's often, the third person in a 2-on-1 situation.
And then even analyzing the stats, it was like across the board. I think him and Vlosten were like very mid-range, and Baker and Short, it was like they were very consistent. They were always thereabouts, but they were never high.
Yeah. Whereas, when we looked at total one-on-one contests, just out of interest, the two highest were Wiedering and Jones, who both had 20 more contests each than the next two, who I think were Harris Andrews and Darcy Gardner. So teams like Carlton and Brisbane are isolating their key defenders a bit more. So they're more likely then to have a statistical impact from that perspective.
Yeah, so we were saying, maybe if we had our time again, we would have taken the effort to work out maybe our own statistic. It was something that we'd done for the ruckman. So hitouts was like completely dominated by Brodie Grundy, but he competed at like almost 200 more contests than Nick Natanui. So we kind of just tried to normalize that a bit by dividing, one by the other and getting a bit more of a normalized stat. Pretty happy with that. I don't know if it was 100%, justifying, but
it was sort of something that we wanted to kind of take into account the fact that some teams play one ruckman, which means that ruckman then looks more statistically dominant because they are at all the contests. Whereas teams that play two ruckman, each individual ruckman might not have as much of an impact. I think it's interesting when we did that, the statistic we get out of it is essentially the percentage of contests where a ruckman will have a hit out to advantage. And the highest was Paddy Ryder, who has like half as many contests as ruckman like Grundy and O'Brien, but almost 20% of them result in a hit out to advantage.
Yeah.
Whereas Grundy, for example, is down below 15%.
Goes a long way to showing why St Kilda were keen to snap him up, that Ryder can be so efficient with just a couple of contests that really help Rowan Marshall out.
Yeah, it might even be worth copy pasting that spreadsheet into the doc actually now that I have it up so that people can see the results.
Yeah. I spoke kind of at length about whether I was happy with the team or not. I'm not sure whether you wanted to add anything more to that and then maybe tie into was there anyone that we were disappointed that didn't get picked?
Um, yeah, I mean, there were a few players who I was quite happy to see picked. Um, Mitch Wallace was one of those who I possibly would have had maybe like if not on the field on the bench in a legitimate All Australian team. If we
Mm.
just went through and picked it, off who we thought gut feel kind of thing. I thought Mitch Wallace had an incredible season, so I was happy that he got picked.
Can I just butt in there as well?
Yeah,
The trade analysis video we did pre-season, we made a big deal about the Bulldogs forward line and the ability to have multiple goal kickers this season.
hmm
Mitch Wallace was a name that wasn't mentioned once in that video.
no, that's true.
So I think it's a true testament to him after he's come back from that horrible foot injury,
Yeah,
spent a lot more time forward. He's really grabbed it with two hands.
he's almost been like a new draft pick for them. He's come back in, he's playing a new position, and he's having a huge impact.
Yeah, very
Um,
impressive.
I thought it was nice that almost like by coincidence we picked Patrick Dangerfield on the half forward flank.
Yeah.
Well, um, probably because that reflects the fact that he spent a bit of time forward this year,
Mm.
and actually almost did play that like hybrid half forward flank wing role. Sorry, half forward flank midfield role. He'd go in for a couple of centre bounces, have an impact in the middle, and then he'd go back forward again.
Yep.
So that was not something we did by design, but a nice kind of coincidence that dropped out of it.
Yeah, it was like we were coming to select it, and we were like, "Geez, it's going to be Danger." Like, how about it? It
Yeah.
was just a funny moment.
Um, the area, I think we spoke about this a bit as well. The area, the back line was maybe a little bit iffy, but we talked a bit about the difficulties that we had there. But looking at those players, they've all had pretty good seasons. Jake Lever's definitely had his best season at Melbourne since he went across.
Mm.
Um, a lot's been spoken about Harris Andrews and Luke Mcdonald. I think we both said was a name that had he been playing in a team that wasn't North Melbourne this year, probably would have been a walk-up start for the All Australian team.
Yeah, like I think I was talking to someone. I was surprised that he wasn't included in the squad. Played on. I think like Shepherd, he kind of has the argument that he played on some of the best players as well. I know he definitely spent time on Dusty whenever he went forward.
Yeah. Um, was not as dominant in winning contests, but
Yeah,
racked up huge defensive numbers and did enough in those contests to not be too disadvantaged by that. I think so. Yeah, like overall, like you said, I think I'm happy with the experiment. I'm happy with the system that we came up with, and I'm actually really excited now that we have a whole year to kind of like tinker it and play with it and come up with a system that maybe works slightly better next year.
yeah. And if you have a system, if you're still listening and you've got some great ideas, then please, please, please put them in the comments below, or get in touch with us on either Instagram or Facebook is an easy way to get in touch and just give a couple of thoughts. If you have any in-depth kind of things
Yeah.
that might warrant a bit more discussion than a YouTube comment, then we're all ears.
As to players that we were disappointed we didn't get in the team, I think the main one for me would be Boak.
Yeah.
I mean, Clayton Oliver was dominant in the stats that we picked, like far and away the winner in that category. That's possibly just a consequence of the stats that we picked, but I think Boak's had a really good year that wasn't really captured statistically. Like I think none of his stats were really that outstanding, but he
Mm.
was very solid across the board.
Yeah, and that meant that he just didn't have that one or two really high stats that some of the other mids had to just sneak in front of him.
What about you? Was there anyone else you were
Yeah, I
disappointed
agree,
you didn't get?
Boak. I don't know. Like we were disappointed Dylan Grimes wasn't included in the actual squad, and like we said, some of the people you'd expect to show up high in the stats just didn't for key defenders. So that's that. But yeah,
Yeah.
no one immediate springs to mind, but I'm sure there's someone.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be told in the comments who else
Yeah,
we.
I can't believe you didn't even care that this person wasn't
Um,
picked.
Haynes was another one, I think,
Yeah, that's the one.
that we were like, he's had a very good year and was actually quite high in some stats, but then very low in others.
Mm. And I
We,
think that probably reflects maybe the hybrid role that he plays.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
doesn't do one single thing.
He was another one a bit like Ryan, where it was kind of hard to put him into a category.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe that is something that we work on a little bit more for next year is how we define some of these players, how we lump them into roles.
Yeah.
And we could even, reevaluate the categories themselves that we used. Like, do we need 2 rebounding defenders? Do we need 3 talls? Um, with the mantra we had, it was kind of like you'd have 2 talls playing the lockdown on the key forward, and then your third tall is the interceptor.
Mm.
Um, but then that third tall ended up being Harris Andrews. So probably not really a great reflection if you have, Jake Lever at fullback and Harris Andrews in the back pocket. You might want to swap those two around.
Yeah, definitely. And it was just for the integrity of the stats that we didn't do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think we've pretty much covered everything that we needed to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much if you're still listening. We do have plenty more content kind of in the, I don't know, it's slowly bottlenecking up a little bit. So once we have a little bit more free time submitting uni assignments and everything, then we will be back posting content.
Yeah, we're going to get a couple of other voices appearing on the channel in the not too distant future as well, which should be fun. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, otherwise, once uni assignments stop demanding as much of our time, we'll get back to hopefully posting at least once every 2 weeks like we were before.
Yep. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.
Do you want to give the old Patreon a cheeky plug?
Yeah, we have had in the past a couple of people say, and just general advice from friends and families, that we should get a Patreon going for the page, and that would be a good way for people to show their support. And people have wanted to have another way that they could be a part of the channel and kind of back us in to keep doing what we're doing in our spare time. So we will chuck the Patreon link in the description. The tiers, kind of just general Patreon tiers, just make note that they only let you do like US or Euro currency. So the prices are in US dollars. They're not in the US, they're just US dollars.
What do you mean they're US dollars?
But things are available, like we want to get a tipping comp going for our patrons.
Yeah.
Next year, we'll make some art of your favorite players that appear in the videos. And we wanted to give just also like a little bit of a behind the scenes what goes on. So, podcasts or little snippets like this might pop up every now and then on Patreon, kind of giving a sneak peek at Andreas animating or myself drawing some art, or us just kind of having a brainstorm about videos that we want to make.
Yeah.
So if that piques your interest, or if you just simply like the channel, there's a whole bunch of different options there. And we honestly greatly appreciate anyone who throws their support behind us. So thank
We
you.
can also be very indecisive sometimes as well. So there is a very big probability, I think, that there might be some polls or something that end up on there if we can't decide on topics,
Yeah,
or
definitely.
if we need help, picking something to focus on. Then those are the people we'll turn to first.
All right. Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.
Awesome. All right. Well, good to see you.
Yeah.
Nice to hang out. And hopefully we'll be able to do something. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do something in person by the time the grand final rolls around and the Tigers are playing.
Yeah.
Cool.